Part III, Section 19, of The Maine Woods, by Henry David Thoreau. This recording is in the public domain. Recording by Expatriate in Bangor, Maine. Part III, The Allegash and East Branch, Section 18. Measured on the map, Moosehead Lake is 12 miles wide at the widest place, and 30 miles long in a direct line, but longer as it lies. The captain of the steamer called it 38 miles as he steered. We should probably go about 40. The Indian said that it was called Mspame because large water. Squaw Mountain rose darkly on our left, near the outlet of the Kennebec, and what the Indian called Spencer Bay Mountain on the east, and already we saw Mount Kineo before us in the north. Paddling near the shore, we frequently heard the pee-pee of the olive-sided flycatcher, also the wood pewee, and the kingfisher, thus early in the morning. The Indian reminding us that he could not work without eating, we stopped to breakfast on the main shore, southwest of Deer Island, at a spot where the Mimulus ringens grew abundantly. We took out our bags, and the Indian made a fire under a very large bleached log, using white pine bark from a stump, though he said that hemlock was better, and kindling with canoe birch bark. Our table was a large piece of freshly peeled birch bark laid wrong side up, and our breakfast consisted of hard bread, fried pork, and strong coffee, well sweetened, in which we did not miss the milk. While we were getting breakfast, a brood of 12 black dippers, half grown, came paddling by within 3 or 4 rods, not at all alarmed, and they loitered about as long as we stayed, now huddled close together within a circle of 18 inches in diameter, now moving off in a long line very cunningly. Yet they bore a certain proportion to the great Moosehead Lake on whose bosom they floated, and I felt as if they were under its protection. Looking northward from this place, it appeared as if we were entering a large bay, and we did not know whether we should be obliged to diverge from our course and keep outside a point which we saw, or should find a passage between this and the mainland. I consulted my map and used my glass, and the Indian did the same, but we could not find our place exactly on the map, nor could we detect any break in the shore. When I asked the Indian the way, he answered, "I don't know," which I thought remarkable, since he had said that he was familiar with the lake, but it appeared that he had never been up this side. It was misty dog day weather, and we had already penetrated a smaller bay of the same kind, and knocked the bottom out of it, though we had been obliged to pass over a small bar between an island and the shore, where there was but just breadth and depth enough to float the canoe, and the Indian had observed, "Very easy make 'em bridge here." But now it seemed that, if we held on, we should be fairly embayed. Presently, however, though we had not stirred, the mist lifted somewhat, and revealed a break in the shore northward, showing that the point was a portion of Deer Island, and that our course lay westward of it. Where it had seemed a continuous shore, even through a glass, one portion was now seen by the naked eye to be much more distant than the other which overlapped it, merely by the greater thickness of the mist which still rested on it, while the nearer or island portion was comparatively bare and green. The line of separation was very distinct, and the Indian immediately remarked, "I guess you and I go there. I guess there's room for my canoe there." This was his common expression instead of saying we. He never addressed us by our names, though curious to know how they were spelled and what they meant, while we called him Polis. He had already guessed very accurately at our ages, and said that he was 48. After breakfast I emptied the melted pork that was left into the lake, making what sailors call a slick, and watching to see how much it spread over and smoothed the agitated surface. The Indian looked at it a moment and said, "That make hard paddlum through, hold'em canoe, so say old times." We hastily reloaded, putting the dishes loose in the bows, that they might be at hand when wanted, and set out again. The western shore, near which we paddled along, rose gently to a considerable height, and was everywhere densely covered with the forest, in which was a large proportion of hard wood to enliven and relieve the fir and spruce. The Indian said that the usnea lichen, which we saw hanging from the trees, was called chorchorque. We asked him the names of several small birds which we heard this morning. The wood thrush, which was quite common, and whose note he imitated, he said was called Adelung quamuctum, but sometimes he could not tell the name of some small bird which I heard and knew, but he said, "I tell all the birds about here, this country. Can't tell littlum noise, but I see 'em, then I can tell." I observed that I should like to go to school to him to learn his language, living on the Indian island the while. Could not that be done? "Oh, yes," he replied, "good many do so." I asked how long he thought it would take. He said 1 week. I told him that in this voyage I would tell him all I knew, and he should tell me all he knew, to which he readily agreed. The birds sang quite as in our woods, the red eye, redstart, veery, wood pewee, etc., but we saw no bluebirds in all our journey, and several told me in Bangor that they had not the bluebird there. Mount Kineo, which was generally visible, though occasionally concealed by islands or the mainland in front, had a level bar of cloud concealing its summit, and all the mountain tops about the lake were cut off at the same height. Ducks of various kinds, sheldrakes, summer ducks, etc., were quite common, and ran over the water before us as fast as a horse trots. Thus they were soon out of sight. The Indian asked the meaning of reality, as near as I could make out the word, which he said one of us had used, also of interrent, that is, intelligent. I observed that he could rarely sound the letter R, but used L, as also R for L sometimes, as load for road, pickalel for pickerel, Sugal Island for Sugar Island, lock for rock, etc. Yet he trilled the R pretty well after me. He generally added the syllable to his words when he could, as paddlum, etc. I have once heard a Chippeway lecture who made his audience laugh unintentionally by putting M after the word to, which word he brought in continually and unnecessarily, accenting and prolonging the sound into ma sonorously, as if it were necessary to bring in so much of his vernacular as a relief to his organs, a compensation for twisting his jaws about and putting his tongue into every corner of his mouth, as he complained that he was obliged to do when he spoke English. There was so much of the Indian accent resounding through his English, so much of the bow arrow tang, as my neighbor calls it, and I have no doubt that word seemed to him the best pronounced. It was a wild and refreshing sound, like that of the wind among the pines, or the booming of the surf on the shore. I asked him the meaning of the word Musketicook, the Indian name of Concord River. He pronounced it Muskeeticook, emphasizing the second syllable with a peculiar guttural sound, and said that it meant dead water, which it is, and in this definition he agreed exactly with the St. Francis Indian, with whom I talked in 1853. On a point on the mainland, some miles southwest of Sandbar Island, where we landed to stretch our legs and look at the vegetation, going inland a few steps, I discovered a fire still glowing beneath its ashes, where somebody had breakfasted, and a bed of twigs prepared for the following night. So I knew not only that they had just left, but that they designed to return, and by the breadth of the bed that there was more than one in the party. You might have gone within 6 feet of these signs without seeing them. There grew the beaked hazel, the only hazel which I saw on this journey, the dirvila, rue 7 feet high, which was very abundant on all the lake and river shores, and Cornus stolonifera, or red osier, whose bark, the Indian said, was good to smoke, and was called maquoxigil, tobacco before white people came to this country, Indian tobacco. The Indian was always very careful in approaching the shore, lest he should injure his canoe on the rocks, letting it swing round slowly sidewise, and was still more particular that we should not step into it on shore nor till it floated free, and then should step gently, lest we should open its seams or make a hole in the bottom. He said that he would tell us when to jump. Soon after leaving this point we passed the Kennebec, or outlet of the lake, and heard the falls at the dam there, for even Moosehead Lake is dammed. After passing Deer Island we saw the little steamer from Greenville, far east in the middle of the lake, and she appeared nearly stationary. Sometimes we could hardly tell her from an island which had a few trees on it. Here we were exposed to the wind from over the whole breadth of the lake, and ran a little risk of being swamped. While I had my eye fixed on the spot where a large fish had leaped, we took in a gallon or two of water, which filled my lap, but we soon reached the shore and took the canoe over the bar at Sandbar Island, a few feet wide only, and so saved a considerable distance. One landed first at a more sheltered place, and walking round caught the canoe by the prow to prevent it being injured against the shore. Again we crossed a broad bay opposite the mouth of Moose River, before reaching the narrow strait at Mount Kineo, made what the voyageurs call a traverse, and found the water quite rough. A very little wind on these broad lakes raises a sea which will swamp a canoe. Looking off from the shore, the surface may appear to be very little agitated, almost smooth, a mile distant, or if you see a few white crests, they appear nearly level with the rest of the lake. But when you get out so far, you may find quite a sea running, and ere long, before you think of it, a wave will gently creep up the side of the canoe and fill your lap, like a monster deliberately covering you with its slime before it swallows you, or it will strike the canoe violently and break into it. The same thing may happen when the wind rises suddenly, though it were perfectly calm and smooth there a few minutes before, so that nothing can save you unless you can swim ashore, for it is impossible to get into a canoe again when it is upset. Since you sit flat on the bottom, though the danger should not be imminent, a little water is a great inconvenience, not to mention the wetting of your provisions. We rarely crossed even a bay directly from point to point when there was wind, but made a slight curve corresponding somewhat to the shore, that we might the sooner reach it if the wind increased. When the wind is aft and not too strong, the Indian makes a spritsail of his blanket. He thus easily skims over the whole length of this lake in a day. The Indian paddled on one side and one of us on the other, to keep the canoe steady, and when he wanted to change hands he would say, "T'other side." He asserted in answer to our questions that he had never upset a canoe himself, though he may have been upset by others. Think of our little eggshell of a canoe tossing across that great lake, a mere black speck to the eagle soaring above it. My companion trailed for trout as we paddled along, but the Indian warning him that a big fish might upset us, for there are some very large ones there, he agreed to pass the line quickly to him in the stern if he had a bite. Besides trout, I heard of cusk, whitefish, etc., as found in this lake. While we were crossing this bay, where Mount Kineo rose dark before us, within 2 or 3 miles, the Indian repeated the tradition respecting this mountain's having anciently been a cow moose, how a mighty Indian hunter, whose name I forget, succeeded in killing this queen of the moose tribe with great difficulty, while her calf was killed somewhere among the islands in Penobscot Bay, and, to his eyes, this mountain had still the form of the moose in a reclining posture, its precipitous side presenting the outline of her head. He told this at some length, though it did not amount to much, and with apparent good faith, and asked us how we supposed the hunter could have killed such a mighty moose as that, how we could do it, whereupon a man of war to fire broadsides into her was suggested, etc. An Indian tells such a story as if he thought it deserved to have a good deal said about it, only he has not got it to say, and so he makes up for the deficiency by a drawling tone, long-windedness, and a dumb wonder which he hopes will be contagious. We approached the land again through pretty rough water, and then steered directly across the lake at its narrowest part, to the eastern side, and were soon partly under the lee of the mountain, about a mile north of the Kineo House, having paddled about 20 miles. It was now about noon. We designed to stop there that afternoon and night, and spent half an hour looking along the shore northward for a suitable place to camp. We took out all our baggage at one place in vain, it being too rocky and uneven, and while engaged in this search we made our first acquaintance with the moose fly. At length, half a mile farther north, by going half a dozen rods into the dense spruce and fir wood on the side of the mountain, almost as dark as a cellar, we found a place sufficiently clear and level to lie down on, after cutting away a few bushes. We required a space only 7 feet by 6 for our bed, the fire being 4 or 5 feet in front, though it made no odds how rough the hearth was; but it was not always easy to find this in those woods. The Indian first cleared a path to it from the shore with his axe, and we then carried up all our baggage, pitched our tent, and made our bed, in order to be ready for foul weather, which then threatened us, and for the night. He gathered a large armful of fir twigs, breaking them off, which he said were the best for our bed, partly, I thought, because they were the largest and could be most rapidly collected. It had been raining more or less for 4 or 5 days, and the wood was even damper than usual, but he got dry bark for the fire from the underside of a dead leaning hemlock, which, he said, he could always do. This noon his mind was occupied with a law question, and I referred him to my companion, who was a lawyer. It appeared that he had been buying land lately. I think it was 100 acres, but there was probably an encumbrance to it, somebody else claiming to have bought some grass on it for this year. He wished to know to whom the grass belonged, and was told that if the other man could prove that he bought the grass before he, Polis, bought the land, the former could take it, whether the latter knew it or not. To which he only answered, "Strange." He went over this several times, fairly sat down to it, with his back to a tree, as if he meant to confine us to this topic henceforth, but as he made no headway, only reached the jumping off place of his wonder at white men's institutions after each explanation, we let the subject die. He said that he had 50 acres of grass, potatoes, etc., somewhere above Oldtown, besides some about his house, that he hired a good deal of his work, hoeing, etc., and preferred white men to Indians, because they keep steady and know how. End of Part 3, Section 19, recording by expatriate in Bangor, Maine.